Solomon Reeves was 40 years old the morning a process server knocked on the door of his row house on Carpenter Street and handed him an envelope before he had finished his first cup of coffee. He was a logistics operations director who drove a company-issued Ford F-150 and whose wardrobe ran toward work polos and steel-toed boots. Naomi's colleagues at the event planning company had met him at the holiday parties and the fundraising galas and understood him, in the general way of people who did not ask follow-up questions, as Naomi's husband, a man who smiled at the right moments, complimented the decor, and drove his wife home safely at the end of the evening. He had never felt the need to add anything to that understanding. The envelope contained 42 pages. He read them standing at the kitchen counter with his coffee growing cold beside him. On page 6, under a heading titled Non-Marital Assets, was a single line. Naomi's Events & Co., LLC sole proprietorship, estimated business valuation $1. $4 million. To remain property of petitioner. He set the papers down. What Naomi's attorney had not found, what Naomi herself had never thought to verify, not in 6 years of operating that business, was that the articles of organization filed with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in 2018 listed a second party on line 4, a holding company, one that had provided $280,000 in startup capital, secured the original office lease, and held a 51% controlling interest in the company she was claiming as entirely her own. She had no idea whose name was behind that holding company. She was about to find out. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning had been quiet before the knock. Solomon rose at 5:15 the way he always had, a habit installed by years of early freight windows and shift handoff calls that could not wait. He made coffee, let it steep, and spread his work folders across the kitchen table. A route optimization report for the Northeast Corridor, a vendor performance review, and a quarterly summary for the portfolio of companies he held interest in through RCG Holdings. The third folder was the smallest. It was the one he always spent the most time with. He was not a man whose capability announced itself. He worked in logistics because he understood that the invisible systems were the ones that kept everything functioning, that no one thought about, the infrastructure until it failed. His colleagues at the distribution company respected him the way you respected a man who solved problems before. They became visible, who built redundancy into systems so the emergencies never materialized. He had been doing that kind of work since he was 22. He was good at it, and he had never once needed anyone to know exactly how good. His mother, Adeline, had worked 30 years as a hospital administrator and raised Solomon and his sister in a row house 4 blocks from the one he now owned. She passed 3 years ago, without complaint and without ceremony, the way she had done most things in her life. She used to say, setting dinner plates on the table after a 12-hour shift, that the work that held things up was never the work people saw. You did it anyway, she told him. That was what work was. He had understood her. He had not fully appreciated how much he was like her until he watched himself do the same thing for Naomi's company. He met Naomi at a church fundraiser 8 years ago. She was standing at a table covered in handmade decorations she had cut and assembled herself, explaining to anyone who held still long enough why the room's layout was working against the event's purpose, how the whole night could have felt twice as intentional with the same budget and a different philosophy of flow. He listened for 20 minutes without interrupting. He thought she was right about every observation. He thought she was the most purposeful person he had encountered in years. On the drive home, he had already begun thinking about what it would take to make a business out of that kind of mind. They married 3 years later. He had believed at the time and for a long time after that he had chosen carefully and correctly. When Naomi began talking seriously about the event planning company, Solomon was the first person she told, and the only one who didn't suggest she be realistic. He believed her instincts were sound. He also understood, from 15 years managing logistics chains, that good instincts without capital infrastructure failed at a rate that had nothing to do with talent and everything to do with resources. So he built the infrastructure the way he had been trained to do, quietly, in the background, without telling the visible parts of the system what was holding them up. He established RCG Holdings through a Pennsylvania registered agent and transferred $280 from his personal savings into the company, and arranged the office lease and had his name placed on line 4 of the Articles of Organization. never said a word about any of it, because he did not want her success to feel like something he had handed her. He wanted it to feel like what it actually was, her vision, her execution, her name on the door. By the previous year, Naomi's Events & Co. was doing $2.3 million in annual revenue, had a full-time staff of 9, and had been profiled in a regional lifestyle magazine. She accepted the recognition fully, and in her name alone. He had been genuinely proud of her. He picked up the envelope from the counter and read page 6 one more time. He spent 45 minutes with the full 42 pages before he moved. He read the way he read load-bearing field reports, slowly looking for the figures that didn't reconcile. On page 12, Naomi's declared owner distributions from the previous year came to $187,000, consistent with what he knew. On page 14, under business liabilities, a line for contracted consulting services showed $102,000 in annual expenditure. He stopped. He went to his home office, unlocked the lower filing cabinet drawer, and retrieved the RCG Holdings portfolio folder, the articles of organization, the partnership agreement, the business account access credentials. He opened his laptop and logged into the business banking portal. His hands didn't shake. His face remained perfectly calm, the way it always did when the figures in a field report diverged from the figures in the system, when the real movement through the network was different from the recorded version. He filtered the transactions by payee and searched consulting. 14 entries, each for exactly $85, each payable to BSC Advisory Group. He opened the Pennsylvania Business Registry in a separate tab and searched the name. The registered sole member of BSC Advisory Group was a man named Brandon Steele. He built a timeline in the composition notebook he kept in the desk for thinking, not his work notebook, the plain one. Every payment date, every amount, 14 payments spread across 16 months, $119,000 directed to a business registered to a man he had never heard of. He wrote the numbers carefully in a column, the way he had been taught to track variance in a distribution network. When you laid the numbers out in sequence and looked at the spacing between them, the pattern became obvious. Someone had thought about the spacing. Someone had been deliberate about it. He searched Brandon Steele. A photography and events portfolio came up, well-styled. Nothing that resembled a consulting operation. Nothing that explained 6 figures in annual consulting fees paid by an event planning company with no documented deliverables in return. He pulled the partnership agreement from the portfolio folder and read Section 7, which he had not opened in 4 years because he had not needed to. Section 7 covered fiduciary obligations and breach. It defined, in language drafted by Vera Whitfield with her customary precision, that misappropriation of company funds constituted material breach. It further stated that in the event of divorce proceedings, RCG Holdings retained right of first refusal on any equity transfer. It provided that discovery of fiduciary breach permitted the majority partner to initiate a compelled audit and structural review. He had written that clause into the agreement the way he built redundancy into freight routes. Because systems failed, because the time to prepare for failure was before it arrived, he opened a new folder on his desktop. He named it Events. He forwarded the banking records to his personal email. He photographed the relevant sections of the partnership agreement. He saved the BSC Advisory Registry entry. He compiled everything into a single PDF, 31 pages. Then he found Vera Whitfield's number in his contacts and called. She answered on the second ring. When he finished laying out what he had found, there was a brief pause on her end. Not surprise precisely, more like confirmation receiving the last piece of evidence it had been waiting for. Her attorney filed a motion 2 weeks ago to have the partnership listing removed from the Articles of Organization, Vera said. The registrar denied it. The motion required your consent. They did not know they needed it. Another pause. She still does not know who RCG Holdings is. No, Solomon said. She doesn't. Come in tomorrow morning, Vera said, and he heard the sound of a pen being uncapped. We have a great deal to discuss. The office on Union Street smelled like old paper and fresh coffee. Vera Whitfield sat behind a desk that held 2 monitors and enough organized case files to communicate that she did not take on matters she could not document fully. She was 61, had gone silver in her 40s and kept it without comment, and had a consistent habit of waiting until you finished your complete sentence before she began hers. She had already pulled the articles, the partnership agreement, and the public filing history. Her legal pad was covered in notes written before he arrived. The motion to remove the partnership listing failed because it required the consent of both parties, she said. Her attorney attempted to characterize RCG Holdings as an administrative artifact from the startup phase, a dormant entity with no active interest. The registrar asked for solution documentation. No such documentation existed. She looked at him over her reading glasses. Because the entity is very much active, the BSC advisory payments are a problem for your wife in two distinct ways, she continued. First, they constitute misappropriation from a company you hold 51% of. Second, the payment timeline, beginning 16 months ago, is consistent with a business owner redirecting funds in anticipation of a divorce she had already decided on. A forensic accountant can establish that pattern very clearly. She set her pen down. Your mother told me once, when we were drawing up the original agreement, that she hoped the structure would never need to do its second job. She picked the pen back up. Let the structure hold. That is all you need to do now. Solomon drove back to Carpenter Street that evening and stood in the kitchen for a moment before doing anything. He had built the business infrastructure for Naomi in the same spirit he had built everything for the people he loved, without expectation of credit, without needing the acknowledgement, because that was what his mother had modeled across 30 years and 2,000 quiet shifts. He had never thought the structure would need to stand against her. He had built it to stand with her. He thought about that for 1 minute. Then he went to his office and continued building the file. 3 days later, Solomon drove to Germantown and sat with his cousin Darren on a back porch that needed new decking, which Darren knew and had been meaning to address for 2 seasons. Darren Reeves was 44 years old, ran a landscape contracting business in Northwest Philadelphia, and had been in the room the day Solomon signed the original RCG documents, not as a legal party, only as the person Solomon trusted enough to have present. He had never particularly liked Naomi, a position he communicated through a consistent, careful silence at every family occasion across 7 years. He listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he got up, went to his bedroom, and came back with his phone. On the screen, a parking lot off I-95 photographed 14 months ago. Brandon Steele's dark BMW beside a silver Range Rover, registered to Naomi's Events & Co. I didn't say anything, Darren said, sitting back down, because one parking lot photograph felt like one parking lot photograph. Didn't seem like enough on its own. He looked at Solomon with the expression of a man who had been right about something he genuinely wished he had been wrong about. You know, I hate when it turns out like this. Solomon photographed the screen and added it to the file. The folder was now 44 pages. He drove back through the city with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. He was thinking about his mother again, about the way she had once explained that patience was not absence of feeling, but the management of it, the choice to let your understanding run ahead of your response. He had been doing that since the morning the envelope arrived. He would continue until there was no longer a reason to. The week before the valuation meeting, Naomi's company was honored at a Chamber of Commerce dinner in Center City. The invitation had come to the house months earlier, and she left it on the kitchen table with a handwritten note asking if he planned to attend. He had written yes on a sticky note and left it on the envelope. He wore a dark suit. He sat at the company's staff table and watched Naomi accept the Community Business of the Year award with a speech she had clearly practiced and a composure that filled the room. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. He clapped with everyone else when she held up the plaque. On the way out, she thanked him briefly for coming, in the tone of a woman surprised he had followed through. He told her the speech was well done, because it had been, and drove home alone through the November dark. He said nothing. He changed nothing. He moved through the final days before mediation the way he moved through the final days before a major system audit, with everything already in place and nothing left to prepare. 2 days before the valuation meeting, Vera brought in a forensic accountant named Dr. Paula Chen, who specialized in small business financial disputes. Paula reviewed 14 months of business banking records in under 3 hours and produced a 7-page report. It identified $119,000 in payments to BSC Advisory Group. It found no documented deliverables, no scopes of work, no verifiable consulting services of any kind. It characterized the payment structure as consistent with the diversion of company funds through a shell consulting arrangement. This is not a gray area, Paula told Solomon, in the particular tone of someone who had spent a career in gray areas and could identify their absence without hesitation. The only question is how you use it. Preparation was the work. Everything else was just the outcome. The valuation meeting was held in Perkins and Associates on Market Street, with a view of City Hall from the 16th floor and enough leather furniture to communicate that people who sat in these rooms arrived expecting favorable conclusions. Naomi arrived with her attorney, a man named Perkins, precise and practiced, and a business valuator with a leather portfolio and the efficient bearing of someone whose job was to attach numbers to things. Naomi sat with the posture of a woman who had done the arithmetic and liked the answer. She believed this was a procedural meeting. She believed $1.4 million was about to become a settled number, and that the conversation would then move to settlement terms she had already drafted. Vera Whitfield arrived 3 minutes after Solomon. She set a single folder on the table. She placed beside it the Articles of Organization for Naomi's Events & Co., stamped with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania seal. Dr. Paula Chen sat along the wall with her briefcase closed. Perkins opened the meeting. He cited $1.4 million as the fair market value of the business, sole proprietorship, non-marital asset, to remain wholly in the petitioner's possession. He was efficient. He looked confident. He set the valuation report on the table as though placing a fact beyond discussion. Vera waited until his hand left the report. Then she said, "Before this valuation can be applied to a sole proprietorship, we need to address the ownership structure." She slid the Articles of Organization across to Perkins. Line 4. RCG Holdings, LLC, 51% interest, registered March 14, 2018. He looked up from the page. RCG Holdings is an active Pennsylvania limited liability company, Vera said. Its sole member is Solomon James Reeves. She produced the RCG operating agreement, then the Naomi's Events & Co. partnership agreement, setting each document on the table with the measured pace of someone who had built this structure for exactly this room. My client holds a controlling interest in the business listed in your filing as a non-marital sole proprietorship. That interest is active, documented, and fully registered with the Commonwealth. Naomi looked across the table at Solomon. He met her eyes and held them, and did not add anything to the looking. The articles were public record, Vera said, to no one in particular. Searchable. Available to any party who conducted a standard corporate search. She let that settle in the room. No one conducted the search. She had spent 6 years building a company without knowing who she had been building it with. Vera produced Paula Chen's report and set it beside the other documents. 14 payments, $119,000. The AC Advisory Group, 16 months. No deliverables. No documentation. Sole member, Brandon Steele, Naomi's attorney, leaned close and spoke quietly into her ear for 2 full minutes. Perkins made one effort, suggested the holding company's structure might be characterized as marital property, given the shared investment period. Vera noted that the capital had originated from Solomon's personal savings account and a separately held investment account, both predating the marriage and both documented in the original RCG formation records. The structure had been established entirely to benefit Naomi's venture. Its formation had been one-sided in her favor. Naomi tried once more. Directly, she looked at Solomon and said that she had not known about any of it. Not the holding company, not the partnership terms, not that the silent investor had been him, that she had believed she built the company alone, that she had believed it was hers. Solomon looked at her for a moment. There was nothing dishonest in what she had said. He knew that. "I know," Solomon said, evenly, without heat, "the way you confirmed a measurement that matched the model you had already built. The offer that came after the recess was a different document from the one Perkins had carried in. The $119 in misappropriated funds would be applied against Naomi's settlement total. Solomon would exercise the buyout clause on RCG Holdings' stake at fair market valuation, $714, payable from business operations over 18 months. Naomi retained 49% and full operational control of the company. She would keep the business she had built. She would pay for the portion she had taken. Solomon signed where Vera indicated. He gathered his copies. He buttoned his coat. "You built something real," he said to Naomi, because it was true, and because truth was not the same as a concession. That was never nothing. He walked in the lobby waiting for the elevator. He thought about Adeline, 30 years of work that held systems together, while people moved through those systems every day without once asking what kept them functional. The work that holds things up is never the work people see. The elevator opened. He rode down alone and walked out into the ordinary afternoon. into a city that did not know or care what had just concluded on the 16th floor, and he drove home on streets that had no opinion about any of it. 9 months had passed like a quarter turning, silently, incrementally, and then suddenly complete. Solomon sold the Carpenter Street house in the spring and bought a two-story Victorian on Osage Avenue that needed more work than the listing had indicated, which was fine. He preferred his investments honest about what they required. He repointed the front brick himself over 4 weekends, section by section, in the patient manner Adeline had modeled, not by waiting for the right conditions, but by working slowly towards something worth having. RCG Holdings now carried stakes in 4 small businesses: catering operation out of West Philadelphia, a custom millwork shop in Kensington, a youth athletics program in Germantown that needed capital for a second facility, a bookkeeping firm run by a woman named Celeste Nkosi, who had come in initially to audit the portfolio and stayed afterward for coffee and a conversation about systems thinking and starting over that, had lasted 3 hours without either of them noticing. She said what she meant without performing the saying of it. She asked questions that assumed he was capable of honest answers. He had found both qualities genuinely rare, and after the year he had just navigated, worth protecting. The buyout payments from Naomi's Events & Co. arrived on schedule, as agreed. The company, from what filtered back through Darren, had absorbed the financial restructuring and kept running. The BSC advisory payments had stopped. Brandon Steele had relocated to Atlanta, where his name was starting over in industry circles that did not yet know it. Naomi's business had survived, not easily, and not without the kind of quiet industry talk that follows a public financial disclosure, but it had survived, which he had believed it would, because he had known from the beginning that she had built something with real foundation underneath it. The foundation, as it happened, had been his, but the structure above it had been entirely hers. Naomi's mother called once in June to say that Naomi had genuinely not known the silent partner was Solomon. He told her he believed that. He said nothing further. They did not speak again. On a Saturday in November, he sat on the back porch of the Osage house with a yellow legal pad, reviewing a proposal from the catering business, a request for capital to move from a leased commercial kitchen to a purchased property. The founder's numbers were careful. Her reasoning was disciplined. He circled 3 lines and wrote 2 questions in the margin. Celeste came out with 2 cups of coffee. She set his on the arm of the chair without asking if he wanted it, because she already knew, and he thanked her without looking up from the proposal, the way you thanked someone you had stopped needing to perform for. The morning was cool. The street below was just beginning to move. He pressed the pen to the page and kept working. He had built everything worth keeping. He was already building more. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.